What's up, everybody? This is Adam from AdMine Analytics, and you're listening to the AdMine Analytics podcast. More people than ever are trying to tie all their marketing data together in a way that helps them actually move the needle for performance. Why do I say actually? Well, because more often than not, tech tools are overpromised, marketing teams are understaffed, and the data just keeps pouring in, which all lead to marketing analytics data that's just not quite helpful enough. On this show, our founder and I discuss all things marketing analytics to help you navigate those complicated waters so you can measure the impact of your marketing and use that data to push your business to the next level. All right. Welcome to the first podcast from AdMine Analytics. My name is Adam Collings. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing, and I have Mike Query here with me, our founding engineer. And it seems appropriate that today's topic, the first in a series of topics that we'll address around how you can get the most out of your analytics data, is insights. The word insights all by itself kind of conjures up a lot of different things. I think if you got 100 marketers in a room and asked them to define insights, you'd get 100 different definitions. So, Mike, I want to start us off just right there and say, in your experience in leading AdMine Analytics and an analytics consultancy where this is all we do all day long for a variety of brands, how have you come to define what an insight is and where do insights typically come from?
So an insight is something that you don't know that you can act on to improve performance. And we've talked about this for years and years and years, tried to refine and simplify and refine and simplify. And you finally know when you've kind of landed on a definition that makes sense when you say it and people understand it quickly and they nod their heads and go, yep, that's about right. So an insight is something you didn't know that you can act on to improve performance. And it needs to have both of those components. If I just tell you, hey, all of our customers prefer green shirts and we're in the technology business selling SaaS software, that's something we didn't know maybe, but doesn't help us improve performance. So
Interesting
it needs to have
tidbit,
both of those components.
Not much you can do with it.
Yeah, that's right. Interesting tidbit. But so when you think about where you get insights from, you consider your information sources. One bucket is the information that you have direct access to. So things like your analytics, your ads account, your search console information, your customer surveys, your user experience monitoring. The other bucket is things like that are information that you don't have direct access to, things like competitor comparisons, data sources that tell you about like maybe what like 6 Sense or demand base or something that tells you where your customers, what company they probably belong to, and other types of like maybe manual market research. So in the internal category, insights come from changes in performance or in data quality, segmenting your audience to find areas that you would like to diminish, poor segments that you'd like to reduce or improve, like reduce friction, or segments that you'd like to do more of something good, and then contribution analysis. So finding out how your various marketing touchpoints contribute to bringing your marketing prospects closer to you, and customer surveys. In the other bucket, the bucket of external information, that's benchmarking, comparing yourself against averages, enriching the data, like we mentioned, like demographics or firmographics, and then market research from people who are not necessarily your customers.
Okay. So insights are things that you didn't know that you can act on to improve performance. And then we have two general areas, data that you own, that you have direct access to, and then data that you don't own that you might get access to, but it's not things that are directly known to you.
That's
and
right.
In the known category, we have 4 things that you've identified. And in the third party or indirect category, we have 3 things. And what I'd like to do is go through and let's take them one at a time. And maybe just talk through some different examples and different ways that we've seen this go right and wrong, and anything that kind of comes to mind as we help people understand how these things, where ultimately what we want people to know is where they're most likely to get insights that would be valuable to their business, things that they can act on, that they have reasonable access to. And then potentially some tips on where they might start with those things. Which ones are the easiest? Which ones are the most frequent? Which ones provide maybe the biggest return on investment based on the maturity of the organization? And we'll kind of go through those to help people identify and potentially take action on getting more insights that they can use to improve their business outcomes. So let's talk. Oh, sorry. Did you?
I was going to say, this is kind of, it reminds me of, and we've talked about this internally a time or two, that this sounds to me kind of like Seth Godin uses the idea describing marketing and content, saying marketers have just a limited number of ways to play with emotion, to communicate value. And there's 10 or 11 emotions. There's not 100. You could maybe make an argument for 9. You could maybe make an argument for 12, but it's somewhere in that range. And knowing which emotions are available on your color palette of colors to choose from to paint emotional pictures is a helpful thing. And I would say that this is a similar principle here, that we've got 7 categories here. You could make an argument for 8. You could try to condense them down to 6. There's not 25. If you can think of 15 or 16 other ones, then you're a savant, and I need to talk to you and understand the way you see the world. But the point is that there's 6, 7, 8 sort of buckets here, and understanding them helps you know which of those colors you can use to paint with in your analytics toolbox.
Awesome.
to find insights.
Awesome. Okay. Great context and a great idea to kind of think about that you're not going to color with more than this kind of range of amount. And so the better, more familiar we can get with these things here, the more likely we are to actually have an impact on the outcomes that we're trying to influence. So, all right. So within the internal data, because that's closest to the vest for most people, within that internal data category, let's start there. We have changes in performance or data quality. So give us a little primer on what you mean by that, and kind of how would you describe that bucket of insights?
Yeah, so it's best to start with just a couple examples. These are the things that are like, hey, you stopped tracking conversions, fix that. Or your checkout, one of your payment options at checkout is not functioning, fix that. Or we launched a new campaign and it got a lot more volume quickly, and now it's limited by budget. Go increase budget. So these are things that, and again, when you think about insights that you can gather from the data that you have direct access to, you're comparing previous performance against current performance, or usually this comes from comparing time periods against one another, and you're looking for things that the way you gather insights like this as an analyst is you're looking for things that are different than what your expectation is. So we're used to seeing this conversion rate. Now we see this conversion rate. And we're used to seeing this number of visitors. Now we see this number of visitors. So sometimes there are changes that are like that, like dramatic step changes. And sometimes there are things like changes in trend or changes in seasonality. But those things tell you something that you don't know. It's new information. And oftentimes you can act on it to improve performance. So sometimes you'll find things that you just didn't know. It doesn't matter. Cool. But lots of times you'll find things that are changes in data quality or performance that you can act on to improve performance.
So would you say that, and so this is just a question, it's not a leading question. I don't necessarily know the answer ahead of time and trying to get this out. But it sounds, as you described that, the thought that I was having was, it sounds like the change is mostly like the comparative thing that you're comparing one thing to another is over a period of time, where like prior to this moment, this particular thing I'm looking at was performing here, and now it's different. As opposed to comparing one channel against another channel, what we're comparing is one period of time over another period of time for the same general thing that you're looking at: conversion rate, traffic, whatever the case may be. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and you definitely could be slicing down to a narrow set of information. Like you might be saying, let's look at just one specific product category's performance over time. Oh, look, it bumps up during this portion of the year. That might be something related to seasonality you could learn from. But that's different. It's a different color in your palette than segmenting the audience and comparing two segments during the same period of time. And that's actually our next bucket.
All right. Well, I don't want to segue us just yet.
Okay.
Are there are there what is the ease in your mind of finding insights within this category? Again, we're talking about changes in performance. You also talk about data quality. What do you mean? What do you think? Tell us what the difference is between like change in performance and data quality.
Sometimes you don't know when you're looking at the data, or when a machine's looking at the data. It's hard to tell the difference between the two, but data quality is something that doesn't affect the user experience. So like, hey, surprise, we just stopped tracking all visitors on our website. That's a change in the data, but it's a data quality thing. The users are still coming to the website potentially. We're just not tracking them anymore. Then there's the actual performance things that are like, our add to cart button broke, and so people aren't adding to cart anymore. Like, well, that's actually a real thing. Like, people are really not adding to cart. It's not just a data problem.
Gotcha. Okay. And so it sounds to me like these are sort of the ones that would stick out the most. If you had a limited amount of time to perform analysis work, I would think that these would be the ones that, because these are the ones that are most top of mind for most marketers, likely because it's what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to launch a product. They're trying to drive towards a certain goal. They're not necessarily in the mode of like, although this comes later, of comparing one channel to another, but it's more of the whole initiative of driving a campaign or driving a messaging point or driving something like that, which sort of makes it top of mind, which then would mean that these kinds of things, changes in performance or data quality, are the top of mind for most of the analytics work that you're doing. It's the first thing, maybe not top of mind, but it's the first thing that's easiest to see. Is that fair to say?
I think that's right. No, I think you're right. And a lot of times the way you see these is comparing time periods. So that's a super common thing for marketers to do, right? You're looking at the beginning of the week, comparing last week's performance to the week before's performance. You're looking at this month, comparing last month to this month. It's very common to look at periods over time against one another. And so these are some of the most common things that get caught. The common things that you learn that you didn't know that you can act on to improve performance. Sometimes they're hard to get to when you have lots of data, and you might not see an overall change in conversion rate across the whole website, but underneath one specific campaign, underneath one specific ad to one specific landing page, there is a very dramatic change. It's just not big enough to show up in overall data. So there is some complexity in getting down to the granular depths of them. When you have to slice it by a channel, by a landing page, by a campaign, by a specific ad, that sort of stuff is oftentimes goes unnoticed. And frankly, it's just hard to do because there's so many combinations that as a human analyst, you can't get through everything. You need a machine to help you to do that comprehensively.
The more platforms you have, the more products you have, it just complicates that exponentially.
Yeah. That's exactly right. It literally is exponential or geometric complication. You have 10 different channels by 10 different landing pages, you got 100. But now you throw in 2 different device types, and now you got 200. And now you got, throw in the
all the different
more stuff.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so you mentioned this before, as we have time period comparisons that are the most frequently viewed ways of seeing these changes in performance is one time period over another.
Yeah.
But the next category of changes or of insights that we could potentially gather, we talked about segments that can be amplified or diminished. So real quickly, before we transition us from what is the difference between changes in performance versus looking at segments for insights, and then we'll talk more about segments.
Yeah. So this is about during the same time period. I mean, it doesn't even have to be the same time period, but it's talking about this is the idea of slicing your data into subsets and comparing those subsets against one another. Now, if you're a mathematician and you're hearing this, you might be going, wait, hold on. Isn't comparing 2 time periods the same thing as just using that as the mechanism you slice? Isn't that your segmentation dimension? All right, maybe. But segments, you can slice product category A versus product category B. What's our average cart value? And if you find out, oh, wow, it's actually different between those two, then that might be something that you can act on to improve performance. So this is about slicing the data and then comparing the slices against one another. One of the most common things that marketers do here is like, just let's look at channel performance, channel by channel by channel by channel, and we can see what's our average cart value or what's our cost per acquisition. And that tells us something that, if we didn't know it, is very likely for a prospect for us to be able to act on to improve performance.
Yeah, and you kind of, there's a little bit of a can of worms there when we talk about if you were comparing the performance of Facebook versus the performance of Google ads, where like what we're saying is those are two different segments that you're going to compare. And the natural inclination for a marketer would be to say, oh, well, Google is performing better than Facebook. There's likely reasons why one would be outperforming another. Like there's context that matters.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, Google is better, therefore, Google is the winner. Let's just all go into Google. So I think some of that context is important as you're looking at the different segments, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And what I would say is it's when one of the things you're kind of hinting at is like people who are searching for your solution versus people who are browsing their Facebook feed are at different stages of their customer journey. And I would say that's just another slice. Stage of customer journey is something you can slice by. So you can slice by stage of customer journey and channel and offer and coupon code or whatever. There's all of those things are things that you can slice by to find an audience of one with one set of qualities and compare it to an audience with another set of qualities or another experience, and then go, oh, what do we learn about those two things compared against each other?
Yeah. Okay, so if we let's assume that like everybody, when I just said that, everybody's like, well, duh, Adam, obviously, Google is going to perform differently than Facebook. That's not even like next. So within some of the segments that we could have for, let's just say that we're evaluating, Facebook driven traffic specifically. What are some of the ways that people might choose to segment all Facebook traffic? So if I'm looking at, you talked earlier about like one of the most frequent ways people segment is by channel. And we're saying, okay, well, be careful by channel. And so because not all channels are created with the same kind of intent. Okay, so let's go just Facebook. What would be some common ways that somebody might want to segment within the Facebook channel to find insights?
Yeah, so one thing that would be common is to just say, like, let's see what Facebook's performance on mobile versus desktop looks like. You could also say we have different geographic regions. Let's see what the US looks like versus Europe. Let's see what we can. One of the other things that we might do is if we have a target audience, we might one of the ways that you gain insights in this segmentation is by adding more data points to track. So if you were to say, what we don't have is the screen dimensions, like this number of pixels by this number of pixels screen dimensions in our data. And now we add that to our data. Now it's something that we can segment by that's new. So we might even go, rather than just looking at mobile versus desktop, let's look at like how the site lays out on 1024 by 768 versus 350 by 400. Like that would be a place that we could segment further. So a lot of times your segmentation power to get insights comes from adding more slices to the data that you can track. So maybe you have logged in versus logged out customers. Maybe you have a few different offers. You have real estate training courses, and you have finance for real estate development courses or something like that. And so you go, oh, let's slice it by the content that people are most interested in or they spend most time by. So there's inside Facebook specifically, for example, there's 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s of ways that you could slice further down to create two audiences or three audiences and compare them against one another to find, oh, these ones do X, these ones do Y. Which is better, X or Y? How do we get X to look more like Y, or whatever? That's sort of an analysis.
Yeah. So as we close this one out, before we move on to the next category of insights, we're talking about segments that you can compare one against another to find these insights, to either amplify what you're doing for positive performance or stop what you're doing if you're getting negative performance. We're talking about segmentation as a category of insights. So you talked about a few things just in that explanation that was all the way from like comparing screen sizes to comparing like product offers. And within that, there's a large spectrum of time for an analyst to look at that. If I'm thinking to myself, if I had enough time as the marketing leader to compare screen sizes, like that would be amazing. Which means that like that type of team is likely to have more people or more tooling and more resources for that sort of thing. Where, you know, a decent amount of the people that we talk to that come to us, they're wanting to know like what is the difference in product performance that we have. It's a similar product, but it's on Facebook, and we want to know product performance. Or they want to be able to tie product performance to a specific audience of people. You know, we all know that like within Facebook and LinkedIn, you can kind of do more demographic segment targeting, where in Google it's more by intent. So give us, before we close this one out, if I had a limited amount of time and I wanted to segment to find insights, what would be some of the top things that you'd be looking for? If I were an e-commerce brand, I came to Mike and I said, hey, help me segment my data here to find where I might be finding some insights that are worthwhile. What do you think? Where would you start?
That's a great question. This is, and as I answer that, I'll just kind of piggyback on what you were saying about this is heavy analyst intensive. Like, you have to find a lot of ways to slice the data, which takes time as a human to do. And then you have to hope to find things that are different in the way you slice the data that you might be able to explain. So this is like, sometimes you find nuggets of gold, but you're mining and mining and mining and mining to find maybe one useful thing here. This is a hard way to find insights, harder than just looking for changes in performance over time. So I'll make that statement and then say some of the most common ways that you would segment are certainly by, if you can think about how to segment what you are showing your potential customers, and you can think about how to segment your potential customers. So segment by offer and segment by audience. Those are two big categories. Now, inside the offer thing, you can say, well, what are we showing? Are we showing green jackets, or are we showing red jackets? You could consider by color or by style. That would be common. You might be able to say, rather than just by color and style, let's segment by like product category, so we can get a sense for the type of solution we're presenting, like be cold during the warm season, or or look good and show off your muscles during the other time of year. So yeah, that's right. So it's those are two buckets that you can kind of mine in, is how to slice down the offers. On the other side, you can slice down by the people, and a lot of times you can slice your audience based on its targeting. So that's, you're trying to leverage either the audience name from the audience targeting that you're using in Facebook, or the email list that you're using when you're sending emails based on what people have purchased previously, their previous intent, their geography, if you have geographic information when they're visiting you, or their shipping information if you're looking at your CRM or your ERP system. But that's another set where you can go, do people in different interest categories or geographies respond differently to the same sort of an offer? So those are two ways to slice: audience and offer.
So if I could, in summary, then what we're saying, like, you could segment some good places to start if you're ready to do segmentation analysis for insights would be, look at the product offerings that you have and find some natural distinctions between those. The distinctions could be uses, the distinctions could be price points, they could be seasons, they could be those kinds of things. So that's one way to segment. And then another would be by audience, which is what we were saying, like you either match the names of your Facebook targeting or your LinkedIn targeting, or if you have an email list that's like people who have previously purchased versus people who we got an email from who didn't, and you'd be segmenting those audiences and then monitoring to see sort of what the behaviors are that are different in there. Is that, we cover that?
Yeah, nailed
Excellent.
it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're still talking about data that you own. We've talked about changes in performance or data quality. We talked about segmenting. Now we're going to talk about contribution analysis and using contribution analysis as a means for gathering insights. So Mike, give us a little bit of an introduction to what you mean with contribution analysis as a bucket of insights.
Yeah, this umbrella covers things like they're attribution-based questions. So multi-touch attribution is a way to do contribution analysis to determine which channels are contributing. Media mix is another way to do contribution analysis to determine which channels are contributing. Incremental lift or brand lift studies is a way to evaluate a specific channel to see what sort of engagement lift or sales lift you get when present, when not present. So those are contribution analyses for different channel types, for different touch points. You can also do contribution analysis on content. So you can say which type of content that we deliver, which topic is most likely to lead to trials or demos. That's what contribution analysis is looking at either the messaging or the target touch point, like the channels, the targeting, and seeing which of those things along a user journey has the biggest impact to leading towards conversion. That's what it is. Now, this is actually one of the most difficult buckets to get things that you didn't know that you can act on to improve performance, because multi-touch is so hard to do deterministically, meaning where you have a touch point for every single point for a specific person. So you can model a bunch of different people and say which touch points were the most important. As cookies start to go away, third-party cookies, it makes it so hard for us to do this. As we've been in a multi-device world for a decade now, it's so hard to be able to know that this is the same person across multiple devices for most advertisers. It's a difficult thing to have that data, and as a result, it's difficult to do this analysis confidently. And on top of that, there's some tools out there that will try to do the best with what they have to do. You know, there's all these sort of attribution modeling tools. There's an explosion of them. But the truth is that once you get one set of information from them, like here's what this X channel contributes this percentage, Y channel contributes this percentage. Once you get that, you get one insight, which is I now know what the contribution is. In theory, I know what that is. So I can adjust my budgets to maximize the output that I get. So I'm putting the most dollars in, the highest contributing first. And then after that, unless that changes over time, then you're done. So this is often expensive, very probabilistic, it's kind of an art as much as it is a science to try and assume the touch points that you're dragging people along through. And it's like a lot of expense, a lot of time for like one insight, and then you can redistribute budgets. It could be very useful, but you get one thing out of it.
Okay. So I'm thinking as you're talking through that thing, and I'm thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm going like, this has got to be sort of at towards the top of those things based on what you just said, like the complexity to implement, the confidence that you can rely on what you're doing, and then the outcome, the likely outcome of, let's say that you did do it, you set it all up correctly, you did learn everything, you collected it, and now your learning is, and correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm hearing, but it's like a potential learning here would be, people who buy from us do spend time on Pinterest. Pinterest contributes to sales for us.
Yeah.
And so then the next question that somebody might have from that
TikTok
is,
doesn't.
Yeah, and TikTok doesn't.
Or something.
And so, so it would be a matter of saying, okay, well, then we would get rid of TikTok, but you're likely going to have, do we do more Pinterest? Do we do less Pinterest? I guess what I'm driving at from the marketing side is rarely do you find a channel that you say it is wholly unnecessary. It's wholly unnecessary to have a presence there.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
well, and you start to get into the zone that's like, we don't have a click path that shows TikTok being important, but we know that we hear people once in a while on our customer reviews say that they found us in TikTok. And so they just don't click through TikTok ads, but TikTok's doing awareness. We get impression data there, but we can't connect it very directly. And so then this is where it gets fuzzy. It just gets, there's tools to try to do this. There's mathematical approaches to do a good incremental lift or media mix analysis, but it gets fuzzy.
Yeah. So I would say, like, if you're a marketer who's in that zone of saying, like, how do I validate the performance that I'm seeing, or how do I prove the validity of using TikTok or things like that? Putting that into an overall contribution analysis might be difficult, as opposed to like looking at the platform data itself and just being able to just, using your own smarts to say, like, well, we've grown this many followers and this is the type of engagement that we get, and we know that people talk about it when they come through and on other channels, and so there might not be, like you said, a mathematical way to prove some of these things. But so it can be a little bit more of an intuition. Now, if you get to like a large enough scale with your product lines and we're talking millions of dollars in spend per month, and you've got tons of resources to be able to do this, then the value of doing the analysis that way would be better, I would think. Yes.
Yeah, certainly. And it comes down to a lot of this. You can get really decent results from this if you're disciplined about how you run the analysis. So if you say, let's create a test and control group, like maybe we do it by geography, and we say, okay, we're going to make sure we only show ads in this sort of area on TikTok, and in this area we're not going to show ads, and we are really disciplined about creating a test and control group, then you can get a pretty decent lift analysis and start to do some incremental lift assessment.
Yeah.
But you have to be pretty disciplined, and you have to be willing to not use one of your advertising tactics to a specific audience so that you can prove its value. So that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard to do, but more data and disciplined execution, you can run tests and get valid results here. One other thing that came to mind as we were thinking about this too is when a lot of times you'll want these off the shelf tools, you plug it in and it'll tell you what your media mix is after you run it for a month. A lot of times you'll get the result back that's like, hey, our organic branded search is the highest contributing channel to our conversions. So you go like, well, what do I do with that? Like, how do I make more organic branded search? Like that's thank you. You told me that the people who already know about me, who are searching for me by my brand name, are more likely to buy. Like, how do I make more of those? Use other channels. Like, that doesn't tell you anything specifically. So a lot of times this is just, there are learnings here, but it's often high cost, high effort, one-time learning.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one, which is customer surveys, which is, I would think this is, there's a little bit of discipline that would come into this as well. Like, how often do you do them? When do you do them? How big your audience is? What kind of questions you're asking? Those sorts of things. But give us a little bit of an idea of how you've seen or what your experience has been around customer surveys as a source of insights.
I don't see this used almost ever. You see it in product scenarios where people are asking how, like, product teams are thinking about how is the product onboarding experience, and maybe once you become a known customer, what was your account manager experience like? You might get offered $20 for a gift card to take a call and answer a couple of questions. That certainly happens, but a lot of times that's once you know somebody's specific contact information, once they've transitioned from anonymous to you to known to you. And marketing, a lot of the marketing world lives in that anonymous space, so it's harder to survey there. And it's just, this is something that is, in my opinion, underutilized in marketing. In fact, if you want $1 million idea, I don't know, I think that there's an opportunity in this space to create retargeting campaigns. So people who come, look at your site, potentially add things to cart, don't purchase, you never get their information, retarget them on the other places that they go on the internet, just like you would an abandoned cart retargeting campaign, but offer them money for survey results, offer them an incentive for survey results to let them tell you what they were in the market for, what they ended up purchasing, what they wanted versus what they didn't want, how price sensitive they were. To me, this is an underutilized. I never see this tool used in the anonymous visitors. And if I was a marketer sitting in the marketing chair, I would pay lots of money and resource to hear why somebody didn't move forward with a purchase or with a lead for my business. So this to me seems underutilized because we almost never see it employed.
We at AdMind, we use a screen recording tool to kind of watch user sessions so that we can get better at trying to understand, like, what content were they interested in. And there's so many times where you see someone scrolling and they're expanding boxes and they might be clicking on different things.
This is my perfect lead.
Yeah. What is this person thinking? And then they leave and you're just like, oh man, what wouldn't pay to know what was happening at the moment that they then clicked out. So definitely agree that understand. It's one thing when you know the customer. I get customer surveys from my local gym all the time. And I always tell them about how too crowded it is. But so that's for like people that you know, but it's this idea of people who didn't interact. That's like 90+% of the people coming to your site didn't do the things that you wanted them to do. And if you could get information about what that is, I think that'd be incredibly telling. And it's less, it's fun to me as the not as data oriented as some of my coworkers here at AdMind, but hearing some of those subjective things around like what their just general feelings were and like how they felt while they were on the site and like what questions they had that didn't get answered, things that you wouldn't be able to derive just from like session data or something like that. I think that stuff is super interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that rounds us out on the internal data that we would own, the categories of insights that we might get from those things. We talked about changes in performance. We talked about segmentation. We talked about contribution analysis, and we talked about customer survey work. So now we're going to talk about data that we don't own and what some of the categories are that are in there. So one of the first ones that you
jumping in, my vote would be to do that portion at another time.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm just kind of keeping an eye on time here, and I've got something that starts at 9. We're at 45.
All right. Let me re-say what I just said.
Yeah, say what you said. Like decide how to conclude
close
and
it out.
Loop us in. Yeah.
Okay, so today we talked about the things that are the data that you own and the buckets of insights that are in that are on the side of the data that you own. So we talked about changes in performance of quality or data. We talked about segmentation. We talked about contribution analysis, and we talked about customer surveys. Those are all buckets that insights would live in that's in the data that you already own. Next time, in our next episode, we're going to talk about the insights and the buckets of the data that you don't own and how you could potentially leverage those things to discover these insights, to begin to act on them and improve your outcomes. We're so appreciative that you spent some time listening to the way that we see the world through analytics. Today, we're talking about insights. We're happy to have these kind of conversations. And if you've got comments or questions, we'd love to hear about it. You can email us. You can reach out to us on any of the channels that we're on. Mike, any closing words for people that have spent the last 36 minutes with us?
Not at all. Just go out there and find things that you didn't know, and to help people get closer to you and improve your performance and make their lives a little bit better with the offerings that you have.
Awesome. Thanks a ton. Okay.
I don't know about